Welcome everyone to Fashion Declares. We're very excited to have you join us today. This is the first of a series of monthly meetings that are going to be to introduce you to the Fashion Declares team, what our aims and ambitions are, and to really help to evolve the network that is Fashion Declares. We're just going to wait a minute or so, as I know that there are some people that are still joining. It would be lovely if you could tell us what you do in the fashion industry and also where you're based. If you could please pop that into the chat, we'd love to see who you are. Thank you. Lovely. So welcome to Fashion Declares. We have a really full program for you today. If you'd like to switch off your video, please do. It'd be great if you could put into the chat box what you're doing in the fashion industry and where you're based. This is a series of webinars and workshops that we're running. So we'll be having on the third Wednesday of each month a Welcome to Fashion Declares meetup like this for now. And then on the first Wednesday of each month, we'll be having an expert panel, which will be on a series of different topics. So how to communicate the emergency and lead the conversation in your organization, decarbonisation, social justice and equality, low impact materials, the circular economy, governance and transparency, etc. So my name's Safia Minney, and I'm delighted to have worked with a number of fashion leaders to set up Fashion Declares. We have a few more people joining us just before. So we are recording this meeting and we will be putting it on YouTube later. So please do feel free to have a look at it later and share it with people that you feel will be interested in joining. So today we've got some great speakers from across the fashion industry, and then we'll have a section of about 15 minutes to answer any questions that you have. So please put them into the chat box. And I think you'll get a very strong understanding about Fashion Declares, but please feel free to ask anything that you'd like to. So why did we set up Fashion Declares? Well, I think the first thing, as I was researching and writing my book, Regenerative Fashion, I was talking to about 100 leaders, some of whom are here today. And I think the thing that really impressed upon me this change was how we were, as a community, we were fearful, but we also wanted to know how. And that we know that there are great examples of best practice. And what we really wanted to do was to create an industry-wide bottom-up movement, one that really enables us to share best practice, to educate, and to use the power of the fashion industry, not only to promote low-impact production and look at social justice, but also the power to change behaviour amongst our customer communities and also our employees. You know, we have to redesign the fashion industry to fit within planetary boundaries. There's the open letter and also the 5 commitments, and I think what's galvanized the 240 people so far to sign has been that the 5 commitments really cover many of the burning issues, and people are really keen to go much faster and really ask these bold questions. So we'll be coming back to look at the 5 commitments later on. If we could have a look at the ecosystem slide. We know that there are many initiatives within the fashion industry, but we feel Fashion Declares is different. We are currently working with many of these organisations, but at the same time, we're wanting to create this opportunity to really educate and galvanise a huge industry-wide movement. So we're asking people to sign up as individuals to create the change across those 5 key commitments. But what I'd like to do now is to invite Ben Tolhurst, who's been a fantastic supporter, someone I've worked with at Business Declares as well as Real Sustainability and Fashion Declares, to give us a sense of the context and why fashion must change and what we need to do within the industry. Thank you. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Safia, and great to see so many people in the room today. Thank you very much for your time. So I'm just going to do a quick canter through the context behind, I guess, my story and why I'm so passionate about this topic, and indeed Fashion Declares. I've spent 25 years in the corporate world, and I quit my job last year, and maybe touch on more of that later. I think the first message I'd like to get across is that we're in an emergency. We're way off track addressing it. The graph that you can see here shows the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere by year, and you can see three things on this graph. Number one, we surpassed the safe levels of CO2 in the atmosphere way back in the mid-1980s, and by safe I mean the human race has never existed in a world with CO2 levels this high. And why does that matter? Because CO2 levels are an indication of warming, and warming is bad. So that's the first point. The second point I'd like to say is that despite the great efforts, inverted commas, of Kyoto, Paris, Glasgow, and anything before and in between, you can see it's made absolutely no difference to the rising of CO2. And the third thing I'd like to say is that this will continue to rise because, as you may well have read, 60 of the world's biggest banks have just ploughed nearly $4 trillion into projects which will finance fossil fuel burning. So, you know, that's a pretty stark message. If we just move through the next slide and the next one, the effects are really clear. I just want to call out a couple of things. Number one, the number of extreme weather events that has happened in the last 20 years, which is 7,000, is double the number that happened in the previous 20 years. And as we know, these are not linear things, so they will only increase exponentially. We also know this phrase, the human climate niche, and the human climate niche is the part of the world where people can actually live. And we know that by 2070, if we carry on the way we're going, that 1/5 of the world's land where people live will not be habitable because the mean annual temperature is too high. What does that mean? It means that 3.5 billion people will have to adapt, migrate, die, or some other action. This is really difficult stuff. We know that biodiversity loss, we're in the bottom 10% globally as a country, and that we rely on biodiversity for our food, our medicine, our clothes, you know, all of that. And we know that food and water security is under huge threat. You probably read yesterday in the Midwest, in the US, they've got the worst drought in 1,200 years. You know, these things are happening now. It's not some future event. If we just move through to the next slide. This is all grossly unfair. And if we just move on to the next slide, because I think this stat says it all. The global south, which is where most people live and only account for a tiny proportion of this climate crisis, bears the bulk of the cost and, of course, the bulk of human suffering and tragedy. Just move on to the next slide. If we carry on as we're going and we move on to the next slide, we know from the scientists and the UK government know from their own advisors that we are heading for extinction in our children's lifetime. A 4-degree world, a 4-degree warmed world, which is what the UK government have been told to prepare for by their own committee last year or the year before, is unsustainable with human life. So all the facts are there. The direction we're heading in is very clear. Surely we need to do something about it. So we just move on to the next slide and the next one. There is some good news after a thoroughly depressed you. The good news is this, that globally we have all the money we need. We have all the ingenuity. We have all the solutions we need. So the answers are here, right, staring us in the face because we already know them. The bit that we don't have just yet is the will, either the political will, the business will, or even the personal will to actually make these things happen. We have to act like the truth is real and not just put stuff off any further. If we just move on to the next slide. Project Drawdown, if you're not familiar with it, you can download this document for free. They list out the 100 solutions that will address climate change, and the top 10 you can see in this box here. There isn't time to talk through. So These have all been calculated in terms of their benefit, their cost benefit analysis and their CO2 reduction analysis. If we move on to the next slide, at a more, I guess, business level, we also know the sorts of things we need to do, and you'll see some of the language here reflected in the 5 commitments: raising awareness, decarbonisation, supply chain, circular economy, etc. These are the things that all businesses need to do. If we move on to the next slide. And the thing that keeps me grounded is I guess, this quote: we don't have the right to ask whether we're going to succeed or not. The only question we have the right to ask is what's the right thing to do. So what is it that the earth requires of us if we want to continue to live on it? And just before I hand back to Safia, I've not talked about my journey particularly, but when I had my climate epiphany and I quit in the run up to quitting my role, I did a lot of things internally within an organization. So I do have a good sense for the people on the call where you're thinking, what is it that I need to do internally in my corporate organization, my personal life, to make these changes? Maybe that's some of the things we can talk about later or offline. That's my slot. Thank you very much for listening. And Safia, hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And welcome to all of those that have joined since the beginning of the webinar. Really wonderful. So I'd like to welcome Debbie Luffman. She's joined us, I think, from an airport in Peru. Welcome, Debbie. Firstly, could you tell us why you're helping to lead Fashion Declares, and perhaps a little bit about your background? I know moving from fast fashion to sustainable fashion.
Absolutely. Thanks, Safia. And yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you all for making the time. So just a really quick introduction to me. I'm Debbie. Until very recently, for the last 13 years, I ran the product department at Finisterre, an outdoor clothing company based down in Cornwall. Now I've moved on to pastures new with my consultancy, Think Circular, and I'm working within the industry to accelerate change, rapid change that is needed to transition to the circular economy. Why I'm helping to lead Fashion Declares and why I'm passionate about doing this is basically I've had enough of the corporate commitments and continually disappointed of how much we are overshooting and missing these absolutely pivotal, critical marks in the sand. So for me, this is about the bottom-up movement. It's about the 5 commitments. The first one being speaking out for urgent action. That's the one that really resonates for me. It's about empowering ourselves to call leaders to account across the fashion industry. We know there's these very sobering facts that Ben has just run us through. We know these are facts, and we absolutely have power, and we need to come together as a community to make change. So that's why I believe in being part of Fashion Declares. I've really been amazed as well, I think, by the resilience and the agility of not only the world's governments, but also businesses, and particularly the fashion industry, in the face of the huge challenges to the supply chains during COVID. And I think that gives me hope, actually, because we know that we can react, and we know that we can really influence our power and make things happen. So the greatest challenge we have had of our time is the climate crisis. So we absolutely need to galvanize our power against this challenge. It's greater than COVID, but we can do it. So I always have that sort of thread of positivity that runs through. One thing I wanted to sort of call out through my experience at Finisterre. So during my time at Finisterre, I would do a lot of talks. I'd get a lot of emails from people who were quite new to the fashion industry, perhaps disillusioned by the fashion industry. And they would sort of be quite desperate to join the brand and say, how can I switch from working at fashion brand X and come and work for a sustainable brand? And I would implore, if you're sat there thinking that, I would always implore people to make the change within the company that you're in. So, that's actually the greatest gift that you could give. If you know that there are these problems, or you have concerns around the ethics or the provenance, ask the questions. That this is not secrets anymore. So yeah, if you're in that position, please use that power for good. So just really quickly, I'll sort of give you a brief overview of some of my experience at Finisterre. We were a little bit ahead of our time, perhaps. The brand started in 2003. We produced outerwear and swimwear from recycled polyester post-consumer, as well as one of the first people to use sea waste, sort of plastic, in our oceans to create swimwear. And we did this really, I think now it's sort of table stakes, but actually we did this when we were an extremely tiny brand. And we did it because we knew it was the right thing to do, and it was hard, actually. And it meant that we had to make those relationships with our value chain, build on those relationships over time, and create partnerships with meaning. So they knew what we wanted to achieve, and they worked together in tandem with us. And I think for me, that's absolutely at the roots of Fashion Declares, how actually we need to come together and bring all of our expertise into sort of one pot, one skill set, in order for us to overcome these challenges that are coming. And yes, it's difficult. There will be challenges to you know, across the board. There are going to be challenges to make change, but we cannot continue with business as usual. It's an impossibility. It's unsustainable, as we know. I think probably lastly, I'm going to sort of leave you with I like to always leave on a positive. So Ben talked through some of these sobering facts there of how toxic and exploitative and slow the fashion industry can be to make these critical changes that have to happen. We have to transition now. And that can be quite daunting. And I think that actually that can lead, that sort of fear and anxiety can lead to a sort of paralysis of action. And that is what Fashion Declares is about. It's a bottom-up movement. You're not waiting to get a directive from on high. It's about using that power and using that optimism. So I'm really refreshed that my time during the fashion industry, I've met some of my best friends, some of the most loving, caring, passionate, fun people in my life. Some of them are suppliers, some of them are designers and fellow buyers, and some of the fantastic people who have taken their own voluntary time, who are part of Fashion Declares here. Use that passion and creativity that is within the fashion industry to create a positive fashion ecosystem, a community of people that believe that we can make that change. So please don't feel daunted by the mammoth task ahead. Galvanize that optimism with urgency, with action. But yeah, we can do this. So yeah, welcome to Fashion Declares and to a positive fashion community.
Thank you so much, Debbie. All of that optimism, that galvanizing of power and courage and ambition, because my God, we need it. I'd like to welcome Kalkidan Legesse. We've worked together for more than 10 years over a number of different initiatives, fair trade, etc., etc. She's an amazing social entrepreneur. Kalkidan, can I ask you to share with us why you signed, and also a little bit about the commitment that you've read recently, social justice and equality, and also about those enterprises and how that's helping you to respond to the climate, ecological and social emergency as a fashion social entrepreneur.
Thank you, Safia. Hello, everybody. It's great to see so many people here and so many familiar faces as well. So I started in the fashion industry in my early 20s. I actually started as a shopper, just a general consumer in markets in northern Ethiopia, where I first discovered for the first time how fabric was made. And like the stories you hear of, you know, kids in London who don't necessarily know how milk is made, before then I had no idea how you walked and wefted material and thread to produce a material and to produce garments. And I fell in love with it straight away, particularly with kind of traditional looms. And one thing that really amazed me about that process and the opportunity of fashion at that time was how people who were in really impoverished communities could produce heterogeneous designed goods, value add, and then retain the value of those items, and how the weavers and the seamsters and the makers in the traditional you know, artisan manufacturing industry in Ethiopia were earning incomes 4 to 5 times the national average. As a point of comparison, my grandmother, who has a coffee farm in West Ethiopia, was earning a quarter of the national average, because the material that she was producing, the coffee beans, was such a homogeneous product in the market. And as a student of development economics and somebody who felt very passionately about global equality, what I realized then, quite late on to the fashion industry, and I'm sure compared to many people here who studied it throughout their lives, was just the power of fashion to create fair, stable, equitable jobs. And that started off my career in Ethiopia, setting up weaving workshops around the country to enable women, particularly widowed women, to produce scarves mainly. But that simple product, sold at the global market, helped to raise incomes 4 times, and send dozens of children through their schooling. And ever since going through this process, I think I've been very passionate about how consumers really engage with the ethics around their purchases, how they really look at the the skill set and the right to retain value of the garment worker. And when we look at the fashion industry, it's employing 75 million people more, the majority of which we know are women, the majority of which are women in the global south, and unfortunately the majority of which are being exploited through poverty wages, as well as uncertain work environments, unsafe work environments, and this inability to thrive. And as why I've joined Fashion Declares, and something that I'm really passionate about in this industry, particularly an industry where most of us here, I'm sure, will identify as women too, is the potential for campaigning and activism to raise the wages and the working environments of these people. Not only because it's the right and moral just thing to do, but also as published by Greer just last month, it's also a fundamental strategy to manage the climate crisis, as raising wages, raising the working conditions of people in the fashion industry and others can be such an effective strategy to prevent us producing the volume that we do, consuming the volume that we do, and the environmental crisis that comes as a result of that. After that initial company, I set up a company called Sanchez, which I guess some of you in this call will know, and we began selling 200 plus brands who are doing the same thing, but this time using certifications like the Fair Wear Foundation or the Fair Trade Foundation, in order to understand and justify ethics within the supply chain. So my advice to everybody joining the fashion industry now, or people who were in larger companies who perhaps set out on their journeys without ethics and environmentalism at their core, is that it's really important to have transparency along the provenance of the product produced and also at the end life of the product produced. I think something that's becoming increasingly evident now is that the linear model of business within retail and within fashion has overproduced items. The overproduction results in the underutilization of items, and then the excess of items are largely sent to the global south to either grow potential industries or to be treated as waste. And for retailers to really be sustainable, they need to understand where their product is made, how it's made, and also understand what happens to it after it's been purchased and used by the consumers. I'm really optimistic, like Debbie, that so much of these problems are the result of business models that don't really acknowledge and account for all of these third-party externalities. And I'm really optimistic about the potentials we have through community activism, grassroots activism, and new technologies to begin to understand, manage these huge supply chains and use chains. And then take that information in order to design business models that will drive the progress that we see. And I'm delighted to be a part of Fashion Declares. I'm very inspired by the people in the group and the messages left in the chat. I think that if we can continue to work together, I'm sure we can drive change. And I look forward to your questions. I think you can pop them in the chat if you'd like to ask any later on too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalkidan. Thank you, that's brilliant. I'd like to welcome Cecily Rooney from Farfetch. And Cecily, if you could please tell us a little bit about why you signed, a little bit about your background and what you've been doing to encourage other people to join Fashion Declares and to join this journey of rapid climate action.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, hi everyone, and thanks so much for all joining today. That's an incredible turnout, and I'm thrilled to be talking. So my name's Cecily Rooney, and I'm a senior sustainable business specialist at Farfetch. So I've been working in the sustainable fashion industry for around 4 years now, so still pretty new, but I've worked in both the corporate branded side and also at an NGO. So I've had the opportunity to kind of start to tackle some of those issues laid out in the 5 commitments from both sides of the coin, which has been really interesting. So yeah, Safia asked me today to talk about why I've joined Fashion Declares and why I think it's important. So for me, like, I made a decision really early on in my career that I would always want to work for companies or departments within companies where I shared that same vision for change. And like, I know that sounds really cliche and that sounds like I'm literally just making it up, but I kind of mean it. Like, I always wanted to work in jobs which I felt genuinely passionate about, even on days when all I did was admin. I knew that it was important to me to feel like I was part of something bigger and I was part of a change and a movement that was happening. And I think that feeling that I get is the same feeling when I consider how much potential Fashion Declares has, because I genuinely think that we collectively have the ability to change this fashion industry for the better. And I actually mean that. And I say that because I think we've seen it before. Like, if you take things like maternity pay or paternity pay, sick leave, holiday pay, all of these things didn't just happen because CEOs were like, oh, I know what would be nice for everyone. It happened because people like us, normal people, came together and said, hey, actually, do you know what? I deserve better. We deserve better. The industry should be better. And that's what I get excited about Fashion Declares, that it's this grassroots. It's starting from people within the businesses calling for change from the inside out. I also really love this idea of like a community of like-minded people, like everyone in the school today giving up their lunchtime as well. Like, it's great. And I'm really lucky to already be part of some sustainability networks. So shout out to anyone here who's part of SPIN. I really rely on these networks as a place to like share information, meet people, learn. But it's really cool that this bigger community full of people from all different parts of the fashion industry, from consultants to models, to photographers, to finance, whatever, can come together and share stories and create that galvanizing moment. And I think it's especially important for people who are at a more junior level. So people like myself, I'm not a director, I'm not a CEO, but I care about this. And I think having that network of like-minded people is especially important for us, because, you know, hopefully one day we will be leading companies, hopefully, maybe. And imagine like a world where you have a C-suite of people who are all coming from the same page when it comes to climate change, social issues, ecological crises. Like, if everyone in that C-suite is aligned in their vision, like, I don't know, it seems revolutionary to me. So I guess that's why I'm getting behind this. Like, I really want to be able to use this platform to demystify some of the nuances you get in sustainability, bring it into the mainstream, get people talking about it. And so I'd like genuinely urge everybody to just keep sharing it, like put it on your socials, tell your mates about it, be that annoying person down the pub on a Friday night, you won't shut up about it. Just let's get this moving, because I genuinely think that if we in the fashion industry have declared this climate, ecological and social emergency, then it's kind of up to us to do something about it. So yeah, that's for me why I joined, and I hope that kind of sums it up.
Thank you so much, Cess. That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I mean, we need to just keep on and on and on, because, you know, giving up, it's giving up a lunchtime, it's giving up our futures, for God's sakes. You know, it is so devastatingly serious. I thank you so much. I'd like to welcome Mike Barry. And Mike, if you could tell us, why you're helping us to lead Fashion Declares, and tell me about what your hopes and your vision are for the Fashion Declares movement.
Safia, thank you. And Mike, 30 years in the world of sustainable business, 19 of those at Marks and Spencer in the world of Plan A. What brilliant, inspiring presentations already. And I'm going to be very brief so we can get to the questions that you have for us. So I'm just going to offer 3 truths that I've seen working within the belly of the beast, within big business, and how to drive change. The first is you only get true change if everybody calls for it and everybody drives for it. And of course, we need permission from on high, from the boardroom, to say, get on with this. But as we've heard from so many of the other speakers, we need a grassroots movement saying, I want a better way of providing fashion. So that's the first thing we're trying to do with this initiative, is bring all those voices together to call for change. The second thing is we need everybody to have the skills to run a business very much more sustainably. And many of you already have. And what we're looking to do is work with you to help you take those skills out to a wider network of people. Not just hundreds, not just thousands, but tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands as well. And the third thing I've learned very humbly is you can't design a sustainable business from the center. You have to listen. Every single person's got a voice, a view, an idea as to how to do things better. We need to bring that seething melting pot together to co-create a very, very different vision for our business, for our industry of the future. And let me just finish off by reminding you one simple statistic. 5 years ago, Tesla was worth $50 billion US. Today, it's been worth over $1 trillion. We've seen dramatic shift in a complacent industry that thought that electrification would never happen to it. And now suddenly the BMWs, the VWs, the Toyotas, the Renaults chasing to catch up. Exactly the same is going to happen in the world of food and fashion and multiple other sectors. Will it happen quick enough for all the reasons that Ben's outlined? No, it's not. We can accelerate it, but change has started. And to Cecily's point, you are the future leaders of that industry, whether within big business, whether it's startups, whether it's in civil society or any other organization. We need new leaders that don't look like me, who look very much more like you. And that's the industry that we can create together. The tectonic plates have started to shift. Together, we can drive the change we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. That's really, really brilliant. We're going to ask you whether you'd like to put some questions in the chat box. In the meantime, when we were setting up Fashion Declares, so some of you would have been present in May last year when we put to the fashion industry, should we declare a climate, ecological and social emergency, and 99% of people came back and said, yes, we should. And so it was very much to that response, to the 100 people, 120 people on that call in May, that we exist as a network and as a platform and as a movement today. So, so thank you very much. So I'd like you to feel free, write some questions in the chat box. Whilst you're doing that, so many of the topics that you will have heard today from the speakers might be areas that maybe you're not as familiar as you would like to be for them. So as I mentioned, we'll have the first Wednesday of each month, we'll have these expert panels on a series of different topics: how to decarbonize your business, how to promote social justice and equality within your organization, how to switch to low impact materials, to circular materials, how to push for better governance and transparency, and how to speak up for the climate emergency and lead that conversation within your organization. That's the expert panel that will be running in a couple of weeks' time. So please have a look at our webinars. And do sign up, and also please, these welcome to Fashion Declares, we'll be running them monthly, third Wednesday of each month. So please invite friends in the fashion industry to come along. You're of course also welcome to come along again, but I think it creates an opportunity for people to find out more. Ben, perhaps you'd like to talk to some of the questions that we had when we were discussing Fashion Declares over the last 3 or 4 months, also with many of the early signatories some of whom are here today, about what Fashion Declares is and what it is not. Ben, if I could ask you to talk a little to that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Safia. This is very straightforward. Let me start with what we're not. Fashion Declares is not about labeling and certifying. So it isn't like some kind of assessment process, which is tick boxes and assessments, and you hear whether you're in or you're not in. It isn't that. It also isn't a corporate top-down thing. And, you know, I've spent my life in corporate, and I've done some activism as well. And to pick up, I think, a point Cecily made, what this is about is a bottom-up movement. It's people from all levels, no matter how junior you may think you are or how senior you may think you are. It's all levels across this industry to create a bottom-up movement to drive change, because we've seen from history in many different areas that when you have enough pressure pushing upwards, change happens. And that's what this is about, creating and galvanizing change. Yes, being the annoying person in the pub. Yes, calling out things that are wrong. And that takes courage. And that's not always easy, particularly if you're not a senior person and the person you want to call out is senior. How do you do that? How do you go about that? How do you galvanize a network of people that can support you and be another voice and more voices? That's what this is about, creating a network. And part of this network, I hope, and the vision for it would be that we can support people on this call and others who might have some challenges in speaking out, might have some challenges in creating that bottom-up movement. But let's be clear, it's a bottom-up movement to create change, to put pressure upwards, to make this a better place. And that's what we are, and we're not the opposite. I hope that answers the question, Safia.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ben. We have another question, which is, how do you connect sustainability to selling online? And do you see a connection? Yes, we do. I think all of the 5 commitments do relate to whether you're selling online or in bricks and mortar. So absolutely they do. I would very much love you to have a look at the webinars and see what you feel you'd like to sign up for, because certainly you'd find that selling online would cover everything from products right through to decarbonising your supply chains and distribution, and then of course governance and transparency. We have another question. What are your views on the difficult nuances on fibres and the Higg index, and how can we progress to low impact fibres when there's disagreement about the data that drives the decision making? Really brilliant question. We will have an expert panel on low impact fibres, which will cover regenerative farming, biodiversity and organics. We will have some experts that will help you in identifying what are the key questions that need to be asked. And that panel is on June the 8th. All of the webinars will be available on YouTube afterwards, but please do join and ask questions directly on that panel. You're absolutely right. The nuances, the complexities are absolutely the key to getting it right. So thank you very much for that question. Great. What I would love to do is to ask each of the panelists in turn to take just 1 minute to offer the participants 1 to 3 practical things that they can do in order to start the change within their business. Could I ask Debbie to go first?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Almost speaking to that last point, I think, about the low impact materials there. I think one thing for me would be not allowing yourself to get sort of bogged down by data and by different certifications. They're incredibly important and they bring value. They have merit. But I think actually jargon and certifications can be used to make it look like you know more than you do and to sort of mystify the C-suite so you sound clever. Actually, it can slow down progress. So use real language, cut to kind of common sense, think, you know, a bit more laterally. If something sounds a bit bonkers, maybe it is. And my other bit would be just to be ridiculously curious, you know, really ask questions. We're living through an incredible time. There is so much information on the internet, podcasts, Netflix, books, however you engage, get out there, engage, be interested, be curious, ask questions.
Great, thank you so much, Debbie. Another question that's just come in. So do organisations focus on production instead of educating consumers about the truth about the fashion industry? It's a really brilliant question. What we hope to do is to tackle and answer both of those sides. So how do we change how we produce and distribute fashion products with less impact to the environment and the climate, and certainly more social impact, so that it's a positive and a just way of doing business. But at the same time, how do we use the power of the fashion industry to truly change behavior and mindsets of customers and employees and investors? So both of those things. Thank you so much, Debbie. I'd like to ask Cecily, would you like to suggest in 1 minute a couple of things, make 1 to 3 things that the audience can do practically to engage and start to change their business?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, mine were relatively similar to Debbie's, but first one would be find your allies. Like, one of the most amazing things I think about working in organizations is that there are so many skills and so many people with so many different interests that have probably never been asked whether they are interested in sustainability. So start asking people, find your allies, create those little mini networks, and you can do it in a really easy way. Like if your company uses like Teams or Slack or any of those sorts of messaging channels, just set up one up around sustainability, share articles. I've done a book club at a previous company before where we shared books around environmental issues or what have you. So I definitely say find those allies, find people who are going to support you and that you can learn from. Second point, very similar to Debbie's, was around, ask questions, challenge the status quo. And I definitely don't mean like, don't go up to your CEO and be like, oi, where's the carbon footprint? But you can find ways to ask these questions and challenge the way that things are done. And so often I just think people are so willing to hear it. These companies didn't get to the position they're in today by playing it safe. So I think there is, in my experience anyway, at the kind of places I've worked, there's always been appetite for people to ask questions. And then the last one I would say is, don't ignore the small stuff. Like at Farfetch at the moment, I'm working on a project that I'm leading, which is around labeling our bins better and putting posters up for recycling. Not necessarily the most groundbreaking, but there are, like, for recycling, how much stuff doesn't get recycled because people put it in the wrong bins. So if you can make people's behavior change on that small level, then that's behavior change and a mindset change that could just, grow exponentially. So yeah, focus on the small things too, and don't let don't let that be seen as not important, because I think it is.
Absolutely, the devil's in the detail, isn't it? And to further build on Cec's point, on March the 2nd, we've got how to communicate the emergency and lead a conversation and action within your organization. So please do sign up for that webinar and encourage others to join. It's always easier when there are 2 or 3 people in an organization that join something like that, so you can go away and prepare your plan of action and how you'll bring a larger team in to really galvanize change. We have another question, which is how can we make sustainable fashion without excluding the poorest people, e.g. single mothers? I think that's a really good question, and I'm really heartened that to hear that certain supermarkets are also looking at rental and repair to bring these opportunities to similar price points that they're selling to, which makes it so much more accessible. And another question, which is, have you considered your digital carbon footprint. We will be talking in the how to decarbonize your business about digital decarbonisation. You'll also find articles on real sustainability about your digital carbon footprint. So if we could come on to Ben to share a 1 minute of 1 to 3 things that the audience can do to practically engage and to start to change their business. I know you shared some personal ideas before, but if you could talk to that.
Sure. Okay. So thank you. Yeah, the first thing I would say is speak out and speak up. This is so important and it's so difficult to do. But know that you are on the right side of history. Know that you will be judged in a few years' time of people turning around and going, that person was absolutely bloody right, and I wish I had listened to him or her. So take courage from the fact that you're on the right side of history, even though it's really hard to speak up. And again, there will be support on that in the next webinar for those who are able to join it. The second thing I would say is role model, and Cecily gave a great example of role modeling the behavior that you want to see. Make sure that the things you do are visible to your work colleagues, your friends and family, and you're actually living the change that you want to happen. It really does reinforce it. And the third thing is around join other groups. And again, Cecily, you mentioned allies. When I, in my big corporate role, started to legitimize the conversation about the climate emergency and indeed racial inclusion, which were 2 big topics which I voluntarily took on, I found that once I'd opened up the chance for people to talk about it, you know, it all came through the floodgates, right? There is so much pent up desire to talk about these things, but people feel that they can't. So joining these groups, creating these green networks just helps people with the ease of kind of opening up. So those are the 3 things from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. This idea of the floodgates opening up, truly, we're all perhaps a bit shy to say that we're fearful and that we really want to move at a faster pace. Can I ask Kalkidan to share 3 to 5 tips or ideas that could help people to start that journey within their organisations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's crucial that activist communities and change-making communities understand how to properly resource their activities. So whether you're doing that within an organisation and you're looking for internal resources to fund, the strategy you want to enact, or whether you are creating your own campaign or venture or business model, a lot of the things that we're discussing require significant resources in order to be able to do effectively. So paying living wages or buying more sustainable materials require resources. Like, fortunately, there are more resources in this space now than there have been in the past, and the barriers to access them are lower than they have been in the past. But my kind of first suggestion, particularly to smaller enterprises, is that plan your business model for scale and then find how you can access the resources that will get you there. Because the new business models are absolutely necessary, and for them to be successful, you're going to need a lot of significant financial backing behind you. And that leads on to kind of, I think, one of the biggest points in all of this, which is people need to be paid fairly and equitably for this change to be sustainable in their livelihoods. I think what's really interesting is how this kind of contradiction between how people with larger incomes have more sustainable choices but actually consume more. And of course, when we talk about the desired behavior change of consumers, what we're discussing is not the working class consumer buying slightly less Primark leggings. What we're talking about is the middle and upper class consumers buying huge excesses of what they need. And so when to make the progress that we want to see, it's important that income equity is distributed more fairly, as well as important to require people with larger incomes to think more carefully about how they purchase. And then finally, I know we slightly discussed the kind of conflicts around what data groups should be used and what shouldn't, and that I think that's going to be the natural kind of state of affairs until we learn actually how to account for the externalities of business models and lifestyle choices, and measure them, measure their impact, and then begin defining, okay, well, how can they be amended? But in the meantime, those data points need to be captured. So if you're running a company, or if you have the ability to kind of move your company to begin capturing the data around the environmental and social impacts of the operations, I think that's a really significant step that can be taken before the step of addressing how things need to be changed. So you can use tools like Compare Ethics to look at the supply chain, and you can use Schwab and tools like Schwab to look at the product lifespan as well. So yes, just a quick summary: get resourced, pay people fairly, and capture the data, and then we can decide what the best way to go forward is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalkidan. I'd like to ask Mike to share 3 ideas that he feels could help the audience. And in the meantime, I'd like you to write in the chat box if you've not already signed signed the open letter and the 5 commitments to Fashion Declares and will be signing up. Could you please write yes in the chat box? Because we're keen to know how big an overlap there is amongst those who have already signed up and who will be signing up. Over to you, Mike. What words of wisdom have you got for people to engage and start to change their businesses?
Yeah, and very briefly, and I'm going to frame it in answering a number of questions that have been in the chat. And just first to Kalkidan's point, I mean, I think there's a real risk in the corporate world, the large corporate world, of missing the S of ESG. So a lot of what businesses are doing now is framed into net zero, scope 1, 2, and 3, science-based targets, brilliant, desperate, need it. But it cannot be without taking people with them in terms of a fair wage, proper human rights, proper dignity, proper inclusion, etc. So the S has to be at the heart of all our transition of the fashion industry. To Katie's point about regenerative agriculture, that is a massive opportunity to scale. And again, I draw your attention to Walmart committing to convert 30 million acres of farmland in America, farmed by 30,000 middle American farmers, to regenerative practices by 2030. So again, we need the scale of the big beasts in the consumption world to come with us as well to deliver the change we need. To Melanie's point, again, I think the point's already been made, well made. This has to be at a price point that's accessible to all. This can't just be a middle-class luxury, replacing unsustainable consumption with sustainable consumption. Don't feel good now in my posh leggings bought for 100 quid. This has to be something for everybody. And that democratization of sustainability, I might be a little controversial here, is front of mind for businesses like Walmart and Tesco's and Amazon now. And I want people who work there to be embracing membership of what we're doing and driving their businesses to go even further, even quicker in terms of what we do. Luciana, I mean, you talked about engaging consumers in consumption as opposed to just making things better behind the scenes. And again, I will draw your attention to the fact that a lot of the retailers and brands, many of them who are the problem today, are starting tentatively to explore with consumers how to engage them through labeling, through information, through the right incentives. It is so tentative, it is the foothills, but there is a door that's starting to open in these big businesses that people within these big businesses can help us push open even quicker. And then Christine, you asked, you made the point about Tesla and how it's come to go to scale. Tesla's shown us how we can make the green alternative the aspirational alternative. I grew up in a different era from most of you, 1980s and 90s, where people wanted a BMW and Porsche to say had arrived in life. Now people want the Tesla. And there's no perfection about Tesla and its model. I don't sit here and defend all of that. But we have to make the green product or service the option that people want to do, not just for the planet, but for themselves as well. Safia, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was a brilliant summary. Yes, we are coming at Fashion Declares very much from a framing of what does the just transition look like? And that will be a transition that will move away from fossil fuels, which has a huge implication in terms of shifting towards regenerative agriculture. We will be looking at very much closer relationships and partnerships with farmers and with suppliers, and how that needs to be part and parcel of reducing carbon and environmental impact at the same time as improving the social impact for everybody in fashion supply chain. So yes, the S is very, very strongly part of the Fashion Declares framing. So thank you very much for reminding us of that, Mike, and the fact that we all are part of the solution. In fact, this bottom-up movement, this democratization of let's talk about sustainability and the climate crisis, is very much in the design of the Fashion Declares movement. So I would, I'd like to reassure you that this webinar will be available. It's going to be on YouTube. We will pop it up within the next couple of days, and we will send you a link to it. So please feel free to share it with friends and to invite them to come to the next Welcome to Fashion Declares, or to sign up for the expert topic panels. I'd like to ask you to please, if you haven't already, to sign the open letter and the 5 commitments, also to share and invite others to join the Fashion Declares movement. Please, as I keep banging on, do register for the webinars. We'd be very excited to have you join. We've got some really excellent, top-notch speakers, the industry's best on those particular topics. Do invite people to join those webinars too. The webinars are available free of charge, but we are a tiny, tiny voluntary organisation with very, very little funding. So if you do feel that you can contribute a small donation to joining a webinar, that's really wonderful. But we don't want that to be a barrier for everyone in the fashion industry to join. The vision is very much that you might be working in logistics but want to know about fabric, or you might be working in finance and you really want to know about living wages. So we want to keep this as open as possible to everyone within the industry, whether you're at the shop floor or you're in the C-suite. So specifically for your calendars, please, on March the 16th from 1 until 2, we'll be running the next Welcome to Fashion Declares. We will also, so that at the moment they've been designed to start at 1 and end at 2, but we will from April be switching to 4 p.m. because we've had a fantastic response from many of our many brands over the pond in the US. So 4 p.m. sounds like a great time for them to join. And I'm wondering if any of my colleagues have anything else that they would like to remind me that we haven't said. Ben, anything that we've missed off? I think
can't answer that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Fantastic speakers on the event. I know that you've had to move things and dial in from airports, and it's all been we're enormously grateful to have you on board, and thank you so very much everyone who's participated. If you are able to offer any support with anything, if you come on to the Fashion Declares website, when you sign up, it gives you the opportunity to say to offer to support in some way as a volunteer, whether you're a photographer or model, or you're someone who can help us with data or fundraising. So please do keep in touch, and do share, sign up and follow us on Fashion Declares, both on Instagram, Twitter, and on LinkedIn. Thank you so much.